Hi, everybody. I'm Tamara Zoner.
And I'm John Davis.
Welcome to Spirit Cafe.
Come in, sit down, and
grab a cup of love.
A Spirituality Without the Guilt podcast.
Well, today we are talking about what this podcast is all about and welcoming all of you listeners to it and sharing with you why we decided to start it and who we want to invite into this experience with us and how we believe it will serve all of us.
I completely agree with you on that. I think that this podcast is more about the listeners than us and our experiences, because I think that it's about empowering them to step out of themselves and find, universal truths inside of their own spirituality.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you a little about me and how I came to appreciate this Spirit Cafe and spirituality as opposed to religion itself or organized religion. Raised Catholic, catechism every week until I was 18 years old and then given a choice. I can remember being in church and loving the singing part and loving the coffee socials and loving the feeling of community and the library. I found my favorite childhood book ever, The Missing Piece, and not really getting anything that the priest was saying because it didn't make sense to my little heart. It didn't make sense that, I knew people who believed other things, even at a young age, and they were telling me that those people were wrong and that those people were going to go to hell. And I could not comprehend that. It didn't make sense. And so I couldn't align myself with these teachings like my mother was, right? And like everyone around me seemed to be, except for maybe my sister. We would look at each other and say, what? I don't get it.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely get that. For me, my background started with my mother having her master's degree in liturgy in the Catholic Church, right? And for those of you who don't know what that means, that means that she was well, we gave her the nickname Saint Joan because when she started her prayers, it was as long as I'm in the neighborhood. But the thing that was so cool about my mom was that she went on to do to live her spirituality in a much different way than most other Catholics did. I mean, she really looked at it as a lifestyle as opposed to a doctrine. And even though she was the head of liturgical doctrine at our church, so when I was coming up through the process, she was very open. We had to go through all the Catholic stuff all the way to 12th grade. It was part of the rules, because like a good Catholic family, there were 7 of us. And but you had to go through for the full 12 years of CCD. That's Confraternity for Christian Doctrine for you heathens. But when I turned 18, she told me flat out that you have the opportunity to make your own choices in your life, and you need to, find out what you believe. And so I went off and I started doing my own studies. And I went from being an atheist to a Buddhist, and I started studying all the way through. And now I have something that I call simple spirituality.
I want to hear more about that. And I'm going to share a little more of mine. My mom was not always committed. She went through phases. We would call it her Catholic craze phase. And so there'd be a couple of years where we were in church every Sunday, and we always had to do catechism, and we had to get our confirmation and all of that. And then we just got to choose when we were 18. She didn't tell us we could choose whatever spirituality we wanted. We just didn't have to go to church anymore if we didn't want to. So when I started exploring, I think I was just in full on rejection of Catholicism for a couple of years. And then I went to college where minds expand, hopefully. And I was on vacation in California, where my mom is from, in the mountains. And I had grabbed a book off my grandmother's shelf called The Clan of the Cave Bear. And it had so much wisdom within its pages about medicine, right? Medicine, spirituality as medicine, and the wisdom of something bigger beyond us. And they had totems, and they had just this openness about the spirit world that was so different from anything that I had experienced. And I felt an expansiveness within me. And suddenly the world opened. And I remember looking up into this gorgeous blue California sky with the super tall trees in the Sequoia National Forest and thinking, wow, this feels right to me. This is something I can get on board with. It's not that I'm not spiritual, it's that I'm not really religious.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Religion is such an interesting thing because I find that religion very much limits you, and because it creates a set of dogma, a set of doctrines that you have to buy into 100%. But when I did my studies and saw Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam and the Baha'i faith and so many different faiths, I found truth in all of them. And to me, what I talk about simple spirituality, it's looking at all of the amassed knowledge and finding the things that are just universally true in all of them. Because I don't believe any religion has all the answers. And I think that any religion that says that they're the end all be all, that's not love. And I believe that the source, God, whatever you want to call it, is love.
As do I. And while you were just talking, I was sort of in the back of my mind thinking about the name that we chose for this Spirit Cafe. And yes, it's because we love to grab a cuppa and, enjoy a warm drink in our hand. And it's like a cafe menu, right? What we're offering here is an expansiveness of the selection that's out there for spirituality. It isn't just what we were told, it's anything you want it to be. And so we have this menu before us of all of these different aspects of religion that we can draw upon for ourselves and what feels right for us. And as long as the element of love is present.
Yeah, well, and that really is the key, isn't it? The element of love.
Mm-hmm.
I know you and I both say, God, universe, source, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
because I think it's so limited by the terminology. People, I think you and I both being recovering Catholics or recovered Catholics. I prefer recovered over recovering because I think I'm kind of over it.
Yeah.
But I think you and I both have had the struggle of the word God and even sometimes the word Jesus, because,
Yes.
it's like it gets used so often. And in religious belief in general, right now, the Christians are totally vilifying the Muslims. But, the word Islam means peace, and to be Muslim means you're a follower of peace. And, to actually do a terrorist act in the world means you're not a Muslim because you're not
Right.
following peace. Right. And so I have been very lucky in my life to have traveled through a lot of Muslim countries. I have been, Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, blah, 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 so many more. And I have met wonderful, loving, caring people all over those countries. And it's so interesting because, the Christians vilify them and they vilify Christians. And it's not because they're not good people. It's because their doctrine told them certain things. And, you've got to make sure that if you're going to be a truly spiritual person, you've got to live the loving aspects over the fearful, hateful ones.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you agree.
I do. I totally agree. Because all those doctrines separate us, right? So different religions vilify different religions, and those doctrines separate us. And the point of a spiritual experience in this life is connectedness.
Right.
So when we can feel our own connection to all other living things and even beyond living things, that's when we're one with all that is, or the universe, or God. And yes, I do have still a hang up on the Jesus Christ thing, so we'll get into that throughout this podcast. And what we want, I believe, as spiritual practitioners is to strengthen the connection between all of us. And that comes first with the practice with ourself.
Right. It's like being on a plane and the air masks fall from the ceiling. Put yours on first before helping another. Right. The idea really is that you have to empower yourself first. And when you actually do the studies of all the different religions, you start to realize that they're all saying that the power is within you. Jesus himself said, greater works than I have done, you will do. And it's your faith that heals you. He didn't say it was your faith in me. He said it was your faith, your belief, your confidence. Right. And so when I see that in all those other religions, Buddha says, what you think you become, you create your world. And Gandhi says, you must be the change you want to see in the world. Those are all very much empowering thoughts and empowering moments. And I think a lot of the religions in the world take the power away from you and give it to a deity. Mm-hmm. And the deity, or the deifying in general, I think is typically what takes the power away from the individual.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. I remember right around the time I decided I was not going to go to church anymore, and my mother was very disheartened. And I want to say I love my mother very much. We have a great relationship today, and we've grown a lot together. And I told her, well, I'm not going to go to church. I don't really feel Catholic. I don't connect with it. And she cried. And I just said, Mom, I don't need a middleman. Like, I can have a relationship with God, which, even though I didn't like the word, it was her word, so I used it with her, and be a good human being, just like you've raised me to be, and take all of the quality learnings from Catholicism and be this good person. And I promise you, I'm not going to hell. Right. Well, I'm going to be okay.
Can I throw a little historical thing here that's really interesting?
I love how much I just go by my heart. So, but you have a lot of knowledge.
Check this out. In the original Aramaic translations of the Bible, the word hell was Gehenna. And historically, in Jerusalem, on the outskirts of the city, was a place known as Gehenna, where they would take their trash to burn. So if you're bad, you're going to burn in Gehenna.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
The actual definition, or the visual that we get about hell, never came into existence until Dante wrote the Inferno. Because
what year was that? Around what year was that?
I don't have that off the top of my head, unfortunately. But when Dante's Inferno was written, that's where we got the devil and all the levels of hell and all the stuff and all the fire and brimstone, all that stuff. That came from Dante. And the interesting thing is, before all that, when you go before, you got to go pre-Nicene Council, which is when Constantine took over Christianity, and sent his mother to mark down all the sites where things happened. And her mother, and like the whole Church of the Holy Sepulchre and Mount Sinai and all these sites were chosen by Constantine's mother, who felt that they were the right places.
Okay.
So the fact that they're probably not is highly likely, right?
So she just kind of decided.
She went and people said, well, yeah, it happened over there. And she went over, oh yeah, this is the spot. So they marked a spot, right? Okay. And which I find really interesting, because this past year they opened the actual tomb in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre for the first time in years. And when they dated the stuff at the bottom, it came to when Constantine's mother was there.
Oh,
right. So very interesting if you really think about it that way. But it doesn't really matter. Was there a person named Jeshua ben Joseph? Because that was his real name. Ben meaning son of Joseph, but Jeshua ben Joseph, right? Was there really that person? Yes. Did he make an impact? Absolutely, because we wouldn't still be talking about it 2,000 years later, right?
Right.
It's like in England, we know that there was a King Arthur,
Hmm.
not because there's any physical record of King Arthur, but sometime in England, there was a burst of kids named Arthur. And we knew that there was a warlord or a king in that area named Arthur who made a huge impact, right?
Right.
So that's where we get that sort of thing. So Jesus absolutely did amazing things and brought. I personally believe that Jesus, like Buddha and Krishna and many of these others enlightened beings that are out there,
Hmm.
I believe that they understood their personal oneness and divinity with God. And the only difference was they were telling us that we have that oneness and divinity. The only difference between us and them was the fact that they declared it and lived it.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah. So that was one thing I was able to identify with. Yes, he was a good human.
Right, right.
Right? He did great work in the
Yeah,
world. And it doesn't really matter if he was the son of God or not, because when we consider it, we're all the children of whatever God truly is, right? Of
right,
that
right,
love force, that life force, that endless energy in the world, by whatever name you choose to call it. We're all the children of that.
right, right, right. Exactly. And the son of, you said the son of God. To me, that's one of the most fascinating stories in Christianity is the fact that before the Nicene Council, the year 325, I think it was, or 328, something like that, which is, get that, 328, 328 years after Jesus died or Jesus was born. So, okay.
Okay.
So 300 years. So think about that. It's, we're talking 1700s if we're going back from now, right? Right. So
Okay.
is that how far back?
Hmm.
For 300 years, Jesus was a prophet, a teacher. The Jewish faith thought he was a fraud, right? The Coptic text said he was a married man. The Gnostic text said he was a married man. Um, they said that he was basically an enlightened being. But it wasn't until the Nicene Council when Constantine said, okay, is he a man or is he God on earth? And when Constantine and the Nicene Council said that, and they got rid of over 60 books from the Bible, they compiled the Bible in that, and they got rid of over 60 books that are in the Gnostic text and the Coptic text.
Wow.
And when they did that, suddenly, when Jesus became the Son of God, every other religion on earth was wrong. Because at that point, no, Jesus is the one Son of God. And, you know, you can have a different thought and a different belief and not have known Jesus in your life and known, Buddha instead, but you're
Hmm.
wrong now because
Yeah.
Jesus is the right one. That judgment, that fear is I think the biggest hindrance of any religion out there.
Well, sure, but it served its purpose, right?
Sure it did. Sure
I
it
mean,
did.
that was a great way. Fear is a magnificent tool for control.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you want to look at this from a political and historical perspective, it's very interesting because Christianity was growing. It was becoming a very big and popular religion at the time, and paganism or the Roman religion was falling to the wayside. Now, that Nicene Council thing I talked about,
Hmm.
Constantine came to that Nicene Council dressed as the pagan sun god, and Constantine remained a pagan until his deathbed when he was baptized. So
Oh.
he wanted to live the life of a pagan, toga toga toga, right? Right. And then go to a Christian heaven. So I mean that's the way he lived his life, right? And so it really is an interesting animal that suddenly he comes in there and they do a couple things. Jesus becomes the Son of God.
Okay.
All of the Christian holidays get set right next to pagan holidays,
Right.
which makes it a real easy transition for pagans,
Hmm.
right? Um, and it's really funny because my friends are Greek and their Easter's at a different time of the year than mine. I'm like, what's that about? Right, right. um, and the idea that in Christianity now, he needed to get control of the masses, like you said.
Mhm.
And so when they edited the books, the majority of the New Testament became Paul, and Paul was a Roman citizen who lived with Governor Felix. And Paul, if you read the New Testament, it's the majority of the book is Paul and John. And John is just brilliant, by the way. John,
It's a good name, isn't it?
good name. John was the esoteric writings that couldn't be twisted in any way, shape, or form. So John is the one who says God is love, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Paul's were filled with the rules that everyone had to follow.
Okay.
Including and this is the one that I always come back to. He said that no Christian man could wear his hair longer than his shoulder because that's how Jesus wore his. Well, a Jewish man in that time wore it longer than his shoulder. And the only ones who didn't really wear their hair longer than their shoulder at that time were Romans.
Mm-hmm.
So he was actually giving Roman doctrine through the Testament. And
that's so interesting about the hair. First of all, although you can't see him, John doesn't have any on his head anyway. And, when I picture the images of Jesus that I've grown up seeing, his hair is significantly longer than his shoulders.
Right. And it's really interesting, the depictions of Jesus that we say nowadays don't match what a person in that time period would even look like.
Right.
I mean, he would be much darker skinned.
Mm-hmm.
His hair would be almost matty with a reddish tint to it.
Okay.
And probably curls, because that region of the world has that sort of look. Mm-hmm. And so, even the modern depictions that we see of Jesus have become very anglicized for the Anglican churches.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. It's, when I look at the writings and specifically the stories of Jesus, I look at what he did. And one of the stories that always stands out to me is the Samaritan woman at the well. Because first of all, he was a teacher. That's what his profession was. He was a teacher. Mm-hmm. And so it was the Sabbath day when he saw her, right? As a Jewish teacher, he wasn't allowed to work that day, right? And he comes to the well and there's a Samaritan woman. Well, the Jews and the Samaritans didn't get along. They shouldn't have been really interacting, right? Okay. As a Jewish man, he should not have been talking to a woman that wasn't his wife or, in the presence of her husband, right? Okay. So here's this woman alone at the well. He walks up to her and he starts, quote unquote, telling her everything she ever did. That's in the Bible, right? Telling her everything she ever did. Well, the Catholic faith says psychics are bad. Right. So, right. So he just walked up on the Sabbath, talked to a woman he shouldn't talk to, started doing psychic stuff. And she ran off, told everybody else in the village, comes to the man who told me everything I ever did. Right. So when it comes down to Christian doctrine and norms, Jesus didn't follow them.
Exactly.
Jesus wasn't a Christian.
No. So, and I think that brings us back to kind of the purpose. So since this is our first episode, the purpose of this podcast is to really normalize all of us who aren't feeling particularly religious, who rejected a lot of what we learned because it didn't feel right. And I might even risk saying, because we're freer thinkers than a lot of people who just say yes to whatever they're taught. And we, as spiritual people who place love above all else, say, I'm going to actually live what feels right, not what you, whoever the you is, tell me is right.
Right. So that is what our podcast is about. And I think it's really important that we get that right out up front. Mm-hmm. And I think because I think there's a lot of people in the world who think like you and I. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's this is an opportunity for those people to express what they've been thinking anyway.
Yes.
Right. It's a place. Oh yeah, I think that way too. Right.
Yes.
And so I'm really excited about where we're headed with this. And I think that in the end, I think that, you and I will have our own personal journeys in this as well as we explore our beliefs and our thoughts. But I think in the long run, we're going to create a community of people who can now share freely without the guilt.
Yes, without the guilt, because guilt is just another aspect of fear, and it does not serve us in expanding the world and expanding connectedness and expanding love.
Amen.
Amen. Which means what again? John just told me what amen actually means.
Amen.
So you are full of knowledge and wisdom, which we're going to weave into this podcast, and I'm just full of love. So
well, you have a lot of knowledge too, and it's really interesting because I have a lot of book learning where I go back and I do a lot of studying, but you have a lot of practical experience from all of your coaching that brings what I'm talking about and brings it into the real world and expresses it, here and now, which is where we need it.
Right. And thank
Right.
you, because
So,
that is, how we're going to get back to this amen definition. That's how I believe is the right way to live for me, bringing in all of the beautiful aspects of everything that I've experienced in my life and learned, and fully living them.
right. And to answer your question, amen means so be it.
So be it.
It is done.
It
is here
is
and now.
done. As is this podcast for today.
Amen again.
So we're so grateful that you were here listening, and come back again very, very soon for our next one.
For video of this podcast, visit Spirit Cafe on youtube.com.